Greetings. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about Chapter 7, Sociological Mainstream Theories. And this chapter really covers a lot. Some of the theories that are presented include anomy, social process, social control, and developmental and life course theories. And I'm going to spend a very short time kind of outlining these theories, but I think to give you an idea of how to prepare for an exam or to understand these theories, I think what's useful is to really look at their underlying assumptions and then look at the similarities and differences between the theories, and then also look at the advantages and disadvantages of each theory, apply the theory to different types of crimes, and also think about how those theories are related to current policies. Okay, first, your author discusses anomy theories, and Emile Durkheim, a French sociologist, really brought in this whole idea of anomy, or normlessness in society. In the case of anomy, the rules are unclear, there may be rapid social change, things may seem out of control. In other words, there is not enough social control. That's the main premise behind anomy theory. And Robert Merton, another sociologist, brought in anomy theory into strain theory, where strain results when there is a difference or a discrepancy between society's goals and the means that are available to get to those goals. So there's several modes of adaptation to strain. And all this is based on whether or not a person accepts societal goals or rejects societal goals and rejects or accepts the means. And so you get this typology. For example, the conformist accepts the societal goals of living what is kind of the middle class view of the good life, having a decent income, a place to live, a car, etc. And the means, the conformist accepts the means of reaching those goals. For example, going to school, getting a good job, etc. Then there's four other adaptations which vary from the conformist, and those include the innovator, the ritualist, the retreatist, and the rebel. Bringing strain theory even further, Professor Robert Agnew developed general strain theory to focus on anger or frustration that occurs when someone has negative relationships or experiences. That crime may occur when one has that anger or frustration and is unable to adequately overcome that or deal with that. So they may retaliate, or they may escape, or they may use some kind of criminal behavior to try to regain what is either lost or what they cannot have. Earlier theories in the 1960s included subcultural theories, and you can read about Albert Cohn's theory, as well as Cloward and Olin's differential opportunity theory. And you can see that some of the criticisms include, for example, anomy or strain theory, the problem of focusing really on monetary or income related goals and missing the mark when it comes to violence. And then you can see that with the theories that focus on lower income, or lower class, I should say, has obviously a bias implicit in that approach. And certainly there are many stressors beyond social class, and also some of the theories tend to be too simplistic. There's a lot more going on there than just social class. The social process theories, in contrast, focus on criminality as basically learned or transmitted through one's culture. And one of the earlier schools of thought here, the Chicago School of Criminology, looked at this whole idea of human ecology. interesting discussion of Shaw and McKay's work on social disorganization theory. That the whole idea there is that the main cause of crime is social disorganization. And they used crime mapping to look at zones of transition which tended to have the highest crime rates, which were also the most disorganized. And we see some more recent research looking at this whole idea of communities and efficacy of communities to organize. And still a lot of interest going on there with some research. Also, other social process theories discussed in your text include Cohn and Felson's routine activities theory, which we've already discussed, as well as Sutherland's theory of differential association, which basically has to do a lot with the socialization process and learning by association. And Sutherland recommended that we take a look at basically who one hangs out with and their views about criminal behavior as well as their behaviors, which may be criminal as well, and look at the frequency, intensity, duration, and priority of contact. So it's kind of that association. So if one associates with those involved in criminal behavior, they're more likely themselves. And if they associate with those with pro-social behavior, then you would get the more pro-social behavior outcome there. Akers and Burgess talked about differential reinforcement, while Miller brought his attention to the focal concerns theory, looking at areas of interest to primarily adolescents growing up and going through that teenage process of trouble, toughness, smartness, excitement, fate, and autonomy. And the focus also was on lower class crime for Miller. But those certainly, if you ask me, I've seen that very much occurring in middle and upper class as well. And so again, there may be a bias in how it's viewed based on social class or other demographic factors, perhaps, such as race or ethnicity and or gender, region, and so on. And then we have some other theories discussed, delinquency and drift theory, and also Sykes and Motz's techniques of neutralization, which we see often are when we see perpetrators come up with excuses for committing crimes, they would use techniques of neutralization. They try to decrease the harm that they've done, or they try to lessen the impact of their criminal activity. So they use these different techniques, and they identified several, such as denial of responsibility, denial of injury, denial of a victim, condemning the condemners, and appealing to higher authorities. For example, one might say, well, my boss told me to do that, or supervisor told me to do that. And then we also begin to see some critiques of these theories. And again, you have that social class bias coming in there, and also some of the other problems of trying to figure out with differential association, for example, is how does someone end up associating with either criminal or non-criminal social groups in the first place? Does it just happen at random, or is there something that brings someone to that point or another? And then we have social control theories that looks at how society maintains social control to encourage conformity. And Reckless talked about containment theory, and Hershey talked about social bond theory. Social bond theory was very popular a while back, and the focus was looking at a person's bonds to society. This was very popular with juvenile delinquency studies, focusing on attachment to others, having a pro-social belief system, being committed to pro-social non-criminal values, and being involved in non-deviant activities. And then we see Gottfredson and Hershey's general theory of crime, which really brought that into looking at low self-control as a big problem. And there's more interest in there. Interesting enough, what's really, you have a sociological theory here of low social control on one hand, and then also you have kind of the psychological, biological stuff looking at impulse control problems and biological based. And so I think you're seeing some more integration going on here as well. And of course, there is some criticisms of the different social control theories related to. For example, the need for more research support to actually verify these theories. And one of the ones that kind of cuts across all the theories we've been discussing is the failure to account for all crimes. Although some may say, well, no, we don't want an overall theory that accounts for all crimes. We are fine with theories that account for, property crimes versus violent crimes. So you can think about that as well. And then the developmental and life course theories really look at what happens over one's life course and events and age and desistance, or when one quits criminal activity, what's related to that, such as reaching a certain age and maybe getting a job, getting married, having a family. And so we can see that going on as well. And that kind of just summarizes that chapter. Again, a brief overview of anomy, social process, social control, and developmental and life course theories. And this wraps up this video. Thank you.